Well, greetings 3C Church, good morning. If everything has gone according to plan, then most of you should be gathered for church at home at the Van Courten House, and I trust that you are being hosted well and enjoying each other's fellowship and some conversation and some informal time. And if everything's gone according to plan, we should be in Pretoria at this stage, maybe making our way back, as we've been up here over the weekend to help Hannah get set up in her new accommodation. And Elijah is also up here getting ready for the start of their new year of studies. What I'd like us to do this morning is something slightly different. It's going to be less of a teaching and more of an invitation to engage directly with three scriptures around a particular theme. And it was a very common rabbinical practice to actually ask questions. It's actually believed that Jesus asked more than 100 questions. He didn't always tell initially, but he actually asked people to elicit responses and to draw on the fact that often people already know what is right or what is true. They just need to be asked the right questions. There is a saying that if you want to know the correct answer, you need to ask the right questions. And the overarching word for this particular teaching is the word activate. And the word activate means to cause something to start working or to make something or someone active or operative. Activate or activation. Make something or someone active or operative. And now I'm not saying that everyone is passive and inoperative and not working, but I do believe there's something of a rhema word here. You know, in Matthew chapter 4, verse 4, Jesus said, we do not live by bread alone, but by every word, every rhema word that comes from the mouth of God. And so God is constantly speaking to us, and he's constantly speaking to local churches with a specific word. And I do believe that perhaps the prevailing or the alive rhema word for us as 3C community for now is the word activate or activation. And really making sure that the gifts that we are so richly blessed with, not just as people, but the gifts, the specific gifts that each person in the community carries, to activate those gifts so that we grow up and become more mature as a community and more whole and more complete. So the first scripture that I'm going to ask you to look at in a moment, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and for someone to read Ephesians chapter 4, verses 7 to 16. Ephesians 4, 7 to 16. A slide will come up just now. If you have the New American Standard Bible, that would be a good translation. Otherwise, the NIV or the ESV, whatever you've got. And I would like the person to read from verse 7 to verse 16. Some of it can get a little bit wordy. And then I'd like you to circle back and to go to verse 7 and 8. To read that again, and then I'd like you to answer two questions around verses 7 and 8. Then to go and focus on verses 11 and 12 and to answer the question that will be up on the slide around verse 11 and 12. And then verse 16, which is just such a rich verse, so full of meaning and possibilities and imagination and excitement and motivation and inspiration. And then to answer two questions about that. So that slide's going to come up. And then you're going to pause the video and you're going to spend some time going through that particular scripture, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 7 to 16. And then we'll come back after that and we'll look at the next scripture. Well, I hope that was effective and that you managed to get answers that were helpful to you. And there was a measure of agreement and sort of understanding around those. The second scripture that I'd like us to look at is 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 12. And there are going to be two questions. The first question is going to be, what is the main purpose of spiritual gifts? And the second question is going to be, how can people misuse spiritual gifts? So what is the main purpose of spiritual gifts, and how can people commonly misuse spiritual gifts from your experience or from your own reasoning? So The slide's going to come up. You're going to pause the video. You're going to go through some time, and when you've finished, you'll come back for the third and final scripture. Okay, so welcome back. I trust that conversation was helpful. I'm trusting and assuming that you're going to have come to the conclusion that the purpose for any spiritual gift is the edification of the body. In other words, whatever gift we have, it's always for other people. And then related to that, the second question was, how can we misuse spiritual gifts? Unfortunately, very often people assume that a spiritual gift, almost they're the source of it, and it's for their edification, and it's to make them look good, and to make them look important, and to make them look significant, instead of using the spiritual gift to edify other people and to make other people feel that they are significant in releasing spiritual blessings towards other people. I think we've got the model the completely wrong way around very often. And often it's linked to insecurity and just the wrong understanding and model of leadership. The third scripture that I'd like you to look up is 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 10. 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 10. And the two questions are going to be, what does it mean to be a good steward of a gift? And related to that, can you give an example or an illustration of what it means to be a good steward of a gift? So, for example, one of my gifts cluster is that I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher of the word. So it's an absolutely incumbent on me to spend time studying and reading and reading journal articles, reading books, reading commentaries, making sure that I'm up to date with new arguments around various things. That's something of what it would be an example of being a good steward. But you can apply that to many different gifts. The second point really around this particular scripture is the word manifold, or the NIV or the ESV might use the word varied. It's the Greek word poikilos. Poikilos. I don't think it's a poiki like a poiki pot, but maybe that's actually quite a good illustration, because poikis are made up of a variety of ingredients. So please, I'm not saying that we get the word poiki like a poiki pot from the Greek word poiki, but it's not a bad illustration. But the word poikilos means to be richly varied, having a great diversity, or having many facets or many expressions. And the truth is that there are many different gifts, and very often we limit it in the church, and we give greater attention to the gifts that are very upfront and public and use the microphone and demonstrative, and we overlook and undervalue the gifts that are quieter or behind the scenes or different in their expression. Okay, so I've trusted that you've answered the question around 1 Peter 4 verse 10. What does it mean to be a good steward of a gift? And can you think of any examples or illustrations that you know of or applies in your own life? And maybe you explored a little bit around the Greek word poikilos, or manifold, and a recognition that there are such a variety of gifts, and we aren't called to come into a particular template or mold, but we to actually express ourselves in very unique ways and refreshing ways. So in closing, I'd like to make these few points. Sometimes our gifts are sacrificial. Sometimes we have to die to the flesh and do things that we don't want to do. An obvious example would be being on the help team, for example. So Peter Depp and the various help teams, it's not something that anyone jumps up on a Sunday morning and says, I want to go to church early, and if it's particularly in the last couple of weeks, I want to sweat, and it's going to be boiling hot, and the air conditioning is not going to be working yet fully in Master Builders. It's sometimes a gifts, especially a gift of service, is sacrificial. But other times, it's something we're passionate about. It's like, man, why doesn't everyone want to do this? I can't believe that everybody doesn't want to do this particular thing. It's a strong desire and a passion that we have. And it's very easy to recognize that person, or I have got this particular gift because I'm so passionate about music, I'm so passionate about singing, or I'm so passionate about children, whatever it might be. So, but it doesn't mean that we mustn't do things that are sacrificial. And there are always sacrificial elements to any particular gift. The Bible is very strong on teams and on plurality. So, for example, in the beginning, God makes Adam and Eve, and he creates Adam, and he says it's not right for man to be alone. And he only gives the command to fill the earth and to subdue and to multiply and be fruitful once Eve is alongside. So he wanted Adam and Eve to work in a team. We also see that there are many examples in the Old Testament of teams of people working together. We see that Jesus didn't work by himself. He had the 12 that he was training up. He sent people. He sent the disciples out in twos. He sent the 70 out. And he established an apostolic team, a group of disciples. And so then through the New Testament, we find the apostles working in teams with other people, sometimes with other apostles, but sometimes with other people. And so we're not called to be lone rangers in the church. And that's for the reason of relationship, because we're made for relationship, and friendship comes before creativity. It's for our protection. When we go out, that we protect one another, in particular holding each other accountable, but also just protecting, looking out for each other, speaking into each other with love, helping each other, and also as a support and an encouragement, because whenever we exercise a gift or we go out and we minister or whatever we're involved in, we need support and we need encouragement and we need feedback. And feedback does require some maturity, both who's giving the feedback and the person who's receiving the feedback. So I think often in the church we have the wrong model. We have everything sort of built as a hierarchy up to the main pastor, and everyone else sits passively as a spectator, and yes, maybe they applaud or they give positive feedback or not. But actually the model's the other way around, that any leader really is a servant who's trying to bring or to activate other people's gifts and bring other people to the fore so that they get to express who they are within the community. Not necessarily to be up the front, but to really make sure that everyone's gift is being recognized and utilized and valued for the benefit and edification of the body. And I'm going to use a terrible illustration. It's so imperfect, it's so current, it might be offensive, but if you just think even of the model of Eskom at the moment, where obviously our power utility is failing to generate electricity from a few central power stations out into the hundreds and thousands of homes that need power. Now my understanding is that Vietnam was in this position many years ago, and that within 6 months they solved this issue by installing solar panels in homes. And the government gave subsidies for people to install solar panels, and they were able to generate a large amount. I think it was 8 megawatts in a short space of time, so that they could alleviate their issue. But what they were doing is they were decentralizing, and they were taking it away from just one power generation sort of a central place to everybody's house, everybody's roof being a place where power was being generated. And I know that is happening to some extent, maybe without subsidies in the South African context, but you're seeing more and more homes with solar panels on the roof so that people can generate their own power. It's more effective than depending on these central power stations which break down and then all of us suffer. But whereas if we decentralize and each household becomes a place of power generation, it's far more effective. So I know it's a very imperfect, limited, and maybe irritating example, but I do think it illustrates the point of activation, making sure that everyone's gift is activated within the community. So I suppose my parting question, which is more rhetorical, unless you do want to discuss it with your group or with your spouse when you get home or whatever context, but can you identify your primary gift that you feel you needs to be activated or brought to the fore in the community? And if you feel that you need to come and say, hey, this is the gift that I feel I'm carrying, then please feel free to do so. And we as the leaders have the responsibility to really to make use of that gift and to ensure that opportunities are created in order for that gift to be activated. So I trust that's been helpful today. The key word being activate or activation. 3 scriptures: Ephesians chapter 4, 1 Corinthians 14, and 1 Peter chapter 4. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your time together. Have a great Sunday afternoon, and have a great week ahead. And we look forward to being together next Sunday again at Master Builder Center, where we will have an outside or a guest speaker from the inside that we don't hear or see very often. Enjoy.